Think about like the last time you watched your own hands type out a message, hit send, and then immediately felt that awful feeling where the bottom just drops out of your stomach.
Oh, yeah, that instant regret. It's the worst.
It really is. Or, maybe it's a moment in a tense meeting where you hear this defensive, biting remark leave your lips before your conscious mind even like authorized it.
Right, like you're watching yourself say it, but you can't stop it.
Exactly. The logical part of your brain is just sitting there, trapped in the passenger seat, watching helplessly while some ancient, unthinking part of you smashes the accelerator and just steers you right off the cliff.
Yeah. And we all know that hangover of a terrible decision.
Oh, for sure. The hours spent staring at the ceiling at like 3 a.m., running the autopsy of the whole thing.
Wondering why someone who is, ostensibly smart and capable could willfully sabotage their own interest in just a fraction of a second.
Right. And the frustrating reality for all of us is that the gap between who we want to be and who we actually are in those high-pressure moments, it's often vast.
And that gap, I mean, that is the breeding ground for almost every major regret in a person's life.
Yeah.
We tend to operate under this delusion that our lives are shaped by a handful of these massive, highly deliberated crossroads, like who we marry or what career we choose.
Where we live, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But the architecture of a life is actually built from the thousands of microscopic, instantaneous choices we make under pressure.
The little things.
Yeah, it's the decision to snap at a colleague.
Yeah.
Or the decision to yield to fatigue and, skip the workout.
Or selling off an asset in a moment of sheer panic.
Right. And when we look closely at these moments of failure, we rarely find a deficit of intelligence. What we find is a fundamental breakdown in the mechanics of thinking itself.
And that structural breakdown is exactly what we are dismantling today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are talking directly to you, the listener, and our focus is on a singular, universal challenge: how to stop being a hostage to your own impulses.
A big one.
It really is. Our source material today is this highly distilled, incredibly dense summary of Shane Parrish's book, Clear Thinking. Parrish has spent years analyzing how the most successful people in the world navigate complex environments.
And his work really strips away all the standard self-help platitudes, right?
Oh, totally. It looks at the actual physics of human decision-making.
Yeah, the summary we're working with, it operates almost like an engineering manual for the human mind.
I love that description.
It outlines the mechanics of why our default state is so often geared toward, well, self-destruction in the modern world. And it provides this rigorous blueprint for rewiring that whole process.
Because the core premise is that intelligence is essentially useless if you can't access it when it actually matters.
Exactly.
So the mission for this deep dive is to extract that blueprint. We're going to build out a comprehensive framework, step by step, for escaping the gravity of emotional reactions and, installing an operating system that prioritizes long-term outcomes.
And the text makes an explicit promise here. Mastering clear thinking is the direct mechanical linkage to a more successful life, however you choose to define success.
Okay, let's unpack this. The text identifies the primary obstacle to good decision-making right in the first section, and it categorizes it as default thinking.
Right. The battle lines are drawn between raw emotion and clear logic.
Yeah, I kind of think of it like it's like we're walking around with a smartphone that came out of the box with just terrible default settings.
That's a great way to put it. Default thinking is basically that unthinking, automatic response to any given stimulus.
An instant reaction.
Yeah. The source points out two interconnected vulnerabilities here: the act of reacting instantly and the tendency to act on impulse.
And to understand why this is such a huge vulnerability, we kind of have to look at the hardware we're running on, right?
Exactly. I mean, evolution optimized the human brain for an environment of immediate physical threats and, scarce resources.
The savannah.
Right. The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, is designed to override the slower, more deliberate prefrontal cortex the moment it perceives danger.
Yeah.
Or even a sudden opportunity.
Because, millennia ago, if the bushes rustled, pausing to run a logical risk assessment meant you were probably eaten.
Exactly. The default setting of instant impulsive action driven by fear or adrenaline, that was a survival mechanism. It kept us alive.
But the environment changed drastically, and the hardware the brain didn't.
Right. We took a threat detection system built for avoiding tigers and dropped it into, like, a modern corporate boardroom or a complex financial market.
So the modern equivalent of the wrestling bush is what? An aggressive email from a client?
Yeah, or a sudden dip in a quarterly report. or even just a passive-aggressive comment from a family member.
And the brain interprets these modern abstract stressors with the exact same neurochemical cascade as a physical predator.
It does. And the problem is asymmetrical risk.
How so?
Well, in the ancestral environment, a false positive, like running away when there was no tiger, cost you a few calories.
Right, no big deal.
But a false negative, ignoring the rustle when there actually was a tiger, that cost you your life. So the brain is heavily biased toward overreacting instantly.
Okay, but today, that math is inverted.
Exactly. Overreacting instantly to an email rarely saves your life.
Yeah.
But it very frequently destroys your reputation, your capital, or your relationships.
The default mode is just fundamentally misaligned with modern reality.
It really is.
But I want to push back on this a little bit because this concept of the default mode being inherently flawed, there's a competing narrative in our culture that strongly advocates for intuition.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we celebrate the leader who, goes with their gut, or the investor who senses a market shift before the data even confirms it.
The whole trust your gut mentality.
Yeah. So if we're supposed to view our immediate impulses as traps, how do we reconcile the undeniable value of human intuition? The text insists we step back and prioritize logic over emotion, but aren't gut instincts sometimes the most logical distillation of reality?
What's fascinating here is the distinction between trained intuition and raw emotional impulse.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, they often feel identical in the body, right? That's a sudden urge to act or tightening in the chest. But they are generated by completely different mechanisms.
Then they're not the same thing at all.
Not at all. The text is very careful in its phrasing. It points specifically to strong emotions as the element that clouds judgment. It mandates a focus on clear, rational thinking over emotion.
So the gut instinct of, like, a seasoned professional is not an emotional reaction.
Exactly. It is subconscious pattern recognition.
Wow.
Think about a veteran trauma surgeon looking at a patient who's crashing. They might instantly order a specific intervention without being able to articulate the step-by-step logic in that exact second.
Because they've seen it 1,000 times.
Right. That is not emotion. That is the brain's incredibly powerful background processing unit, rapidly matching subtle visual and auditory cues against thousands of hours of stored clinical data.
So it's actually logic, just executing at an unconscious speed.
Exactly. The default thinking Parrish is warning against is the raw surge of primary emotion. Anger, terror, extreme euphoria, or, and this is a big one, profound ego threat.
Because the presence of those specific emotions actively degrades the machinery required for logic. It's a zero-sum game for biological resources.
Oh, the neurobiology is brutal.
Really? What happens?
When the amygdala triggers a strong emotional response, it quite literally siphons blood flow, oxygen, and metabolic energy away from the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the logical part.
Right. The area responsible for consequence simulation, impulse control, long-term planning. You experience a measurable drop in cognitive capacity. You're biologically impaired.
So when the text states that strong emotions cloud judgment, it's not just a metaphor.
No, not at all. Your ability to think clearly is physically obscured by the neurochemical flood.
Which brings us to the mechanical solution proposed in the text, the pause.
A pause, yes.
The source states, don't react instantly, pause and think before making decisions. And, on the surface, taking a deep breath sounds like advice you'd find on some cheesy motivational poster.
It does sound a bit cliché.
Right. But looking at the biology you just described, the pause is actually a strategic maneuver to let the neurochemical flood recede.
That's exactly what it is. The pause is a deliberate intervention in a biological chain reaction.
Yeah.
The gap between stimulus and response is really the only place where human agency actually exists.
Wow.
The moment you feel the heat rise in your chest, the moment you feel that desperate, overwhelming urge to strike back or flee, your system is compromised.
So you have to wait it out.
Yes. Implementing a pause, whether that is 10 seconds, 5 minutes, or a full 24 hours, it's the act of buying time for your prefrontal cortex to reboot.
Think about the application of this for you, the listener, in a high-stakes negotiation. Let's say the other party makes an insulting, ridiculous lowball offer.
Right. Your immediate impulse is indignation.
Yeah. The emotion demands that you aggressively counter or storm out to protect your ego, and if you act in that millisecond, you just surrender all your leverage to your amygdala.
You're letting the lizard brain drive.
Exactly. But if you sit in silence for, 10 seconds, taking a slow drink of water. You're actively managing your own biology. You're waiting for the logical faculties to return and remind you of your actual strategy.
And that silence itself often works to your advantage externally, too. It makes the other side uncomfortable. But internally, it is a rescue mission for your rationality.
That's a great way to frame it.
The text urges us to, quote, learn to step back and think logically. And using the word learn implies that overriding the default is an acquired skill.
It's not something we just naturally know how to do.
No, it requires immense cognitive effort because it violates our deepest evolutionary programming. When every cell in your body is screaming at you to react, holding your ground and doing nothing is an act of extreme discipline.
It really requires an active separation of identity from emotion. You have to recognize that the anger or the panic, it's simply a biological event occurring within you. It's not a command that you have to obey.
Exactly. You are observing the weather, you're not becoming the storm.
I love that. By forcing the pause, you prioritize clarity as a deliberate, cultivated practice.
But we also have to acknowledge the reality of human limitation here.
Right. We're not robots.
Exactly. Relying entirely on our ability to manually initiate a pause in the heat of every single triggering moment, that is a really fragile strategy.
Because willpower runs out.
Yes, willpower is a finite resource. Cognitive fatigue is very real.
Oh, definitely.
If you are sleep deprived, dealing with a personal crisis, or simply facing the 100th microstressor of a Tuesday afternoon, your ability to execute that pause degrades significantly.
The prefrontal cortex gets tired, but the amygdala never sleeps.
That's exactly right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If our conscious defense mechanisms are vulnerable to fatigue, and if we can't trust our defaults, we have to engineer an environment that protects us from ourselves.
Yes.
This transitions us from the internal battle of emotion versus logic into the structural solution engineering success through systems.
Systems are everything.
The text states this explicitly in point 4. Build good decision habits. Create systems that help you consistently make better choices. We're basically shifting the burden of clear thinking from the chaotic present moment into a predetermined architecture.
Think of a system as essentially a decision that you make in a moment of calm, rational clarity.
Okay.
And then you encode that decision into a rule or a structure to govern your behavior during moments of emotional turbulence.
So you're doing the heavy lifting of clear thinking in advance.
Exactly. It's like installing aeronautical fail-safes.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
A pilot doesn't rely on willpower and perfect situational awareness to remember every pre-flight check, right? Or every emergency procedure when an engine suddenly catches fire.
No, they'd panic just like anyone else.
Right. So they rely on an inflexible, standardized checklist. The checklist is the system. It enforces clarity regardless of the pilot's internal state of panic.
I sometimes think of it like bowling with bumper lanes. The system acts as the bumpers, keeping your decisions out of the emotional gutter even when you're tired or stressed.
That's a perfect visualization.
In translating that to personal and professional environments, it's a massive paradigm shift. It means auditing your life to find the areas where your default thinking consistently leads you astray, and building a structural wall between your impulse and your action.
Let's look at the world of investing, for instance.
Yeah, that's a prime example.
Relying on your own discipline to hold an asset during a market crash is incredibly difficult. The panic is contagious. The impulse to sell and just stop the bleeding is overwhelming.
You just want out.
But an institutional investor doesn't rely on their mood. They operate on mandates and algorithmic tripwires. They define the parameters for buying and selling long before the market opens.
So for an individual, a financial system might be like an unbreakable rule. I will never execute a portfolio shift of more than 5% without a mandatory 72-hour waiting period and a written thesis.
Exactly. When the panic hits, you don't have to summon the willpower to fight the panic. You simply surrender to the system you already built.
The system acts as a load-bearing wall. It takes the weight off your exhausted prefrontal cortex.
And we can apply this architecture to almost anything. Look at corporate communication.
Oh man, emails.
Right. How many catastrophic professional relationships are the result of an email fired off in a moment of intense frustration?
Too many to count.
So the system there could be a mandatory outbox delay.
Yes, I do this.
Every outgoing email is held for 15 minutes before it actually leaves the server. It is a mechanical pause.
You can write the angriest, most self-righteous email imaginable, hit send, and feel that momentary hit of emotional vindication.
But 15 minutes later, when the cortisol levels drop and logic returns, The system has protected you. You go to the outbox, retrieve the email, delete it, and write a professional response.
It's brilliant.
And these systems must be ruthlessly practical. In leadership, a system might be a structural protocol to defeat confirmation bias and the emotional comfort of groupthink.
Right, because if a team is deeply invested in a project, their default thinking will naturally seek out data that validates their hard work, and they'll just ignore red flags.
So a leader can implement a red team system.
What's that?
It's where a separate group is formally incentivized to destroy the project's underlying assumptions.
Oh, wow. So their whole job is just to tear it apart.
Exactly. This removes the interpersonal friction of someone having to voluntarily play the contrarian.
Mm.
The system demands the dissenting view, ensuring clear thinking is structurally enforced rather than relying on individual courage.
But even the most robust architecture has vulnerabilities, right? I mean, we're going to build rules, we're going to set up delays, and inevitably we will still somehow bypass our own systems and make a terrible choice.
It happens to everyone.
We'll rationalize breaking the rule just this once, or a situation will arise that the system just wasn't designed to handle.
And that brings us to a critical junction in the source material. Point 5 demands that we learn from mistakes, reflect on past decisions to improve future thinking.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a system without a feedback loop is basically a dead structure.
Completely. In engineering, a system must constantly receive data about its own outputs to self-correct. And the same applies to human decision-making.
So when a failure occurs, like when you lose your temper, when you make a bad investment, when you hire the wrong person, that failure is actually the most valuable data point available to you.
It is. Yet our default reaction to failure is profound avoidance.
Yeah, we just want to run away from it.
We are wired to protect our egos. When we realize we've made a terrible choice, the shame is acute.
It burns.
We want to externalize the blame. We blame the market conditions, we blame the incompetent colleague, we blame the lack of time.
And if we can't blame external factors, we just try to bury the memory completely. Actually, sitting down to dissect our own incompetence is an agonizing process.
It requires a radical form of objectivity, which is really the hallmark of clear thinking. You have to strip the emotion out of the autopsy.
Right.
The text directive to reflect on past decisions. It's a mandate to separate your identity from your actions. A catastrophic decision does not mean you are fundamentally flawed. It simply indicates a bug in your software.
Your decision-making algorithm had a vulnerability, and reality just exposed it.
Exactly.
The ultimate reframe for you, the listener, is to view personal failure strictly as calibration data.
Love that. Calibration data.
Imagine an aeronautical engineer testing a new wing design in a wind tunnel. The wing shears off at high speeds.
The engineer doesn't fall to the floor in despair, questioning their worth as a human being.
Right. They don't sweep the broken metal under a rug and pretend the test never happened. They are thrilled. They just acquired high-fidelity data on the exact breaking point of the material.
They analyze the telemetry, update the design, and build a stronger wing.
So conducting a personal postmortem requires asking incredibly specific, emotionally neutral questions.
You don't ask, why am I such an idiot?
No, you ask, what specific information was I lacking at the moment of the decision?
Did I prioritize a short-term feeling over a long-term goal?
Did I adhere to my established system? And if I bypassed my system, what was the specific emotional trigger that caused the breach?
Was I operating on assumptions that I never actually verified?
Was I simply too tired to execute the pause?
Right. By dissecting the anatomy of the failure with surgical precision, you extract the raw material needed to upgrade your architecture.
You act, you fail, you extract the data, you reinforce the system, and then you act again. It is an iterative loop of compounding marginal improvements.
And once you have established this loop, once you have the discipline to pause the emotional default, the foresight to build systemic protections, and the humility to constantly refine those systems through failure, you possess an incredibly powerful engine for decision-making.
This engine.
But an engine is completely useless if you don't know how to navigate. You need a compass to differentiate the actual road from a dead end.
And this brings us to the final and honestly perhaps the most difficult phase of the framework: signal, noise, and the long game.
This is where it gets tough.
You can have a perfectly calibrated system, but if you aim it at the wrong target, you still fail. And the environment we operate in today is actively hostile to clear targeting because of the sheer density of information.
Gets overwhelming.
The source material addresses this in point 6. Focus on what matters. Ignore distractions and focus on important long-term outcomes.
The ability to separate signal from noise is really the defining cognitive challenge of our era.
Oh, absolutely.
We are exposed to more information in a single day than our ancestors were in a lifetime.
Just constantly bombarded.
Breaking news, social media outrage cycles, relentless Slack notifications, the constant churn of industry gossip. The human brain is not equipped to process this volume of input without defaulting to chronic low-grade anxiety.
Right. And the text mandates that we actively ignore distractions. But how do we actually define a distraction when everything in the modern economy is engineered to present itself as an urgent crisis?
It all feels urgent.
Yeah, the push notification doesn't say, hey, here's a mild curiosity. It flashes red and demands immediate attention.
To solve this, we have to recognize the architecture of a distraction. Distractions are not neutral information.
What do you mean?
They are highly calibrated mechanisms designed to exploit the exact vulnerability we discussed at the beginning, default thinking.
Oh, wow.
The noise in our environment is weaponized to trigger your amygdala. An inflammatory headline, a controversial tweet, an urgent but ultimately meaningless email. These are designed to make you feel outrage, fear, validation, or panic.
They bypass your logic center and hook your emotions directly. So a distraction isn't just a waste of time. It is a hostile intrusion attempting to force an emotional reaction. The noise is basically the bait.
Exactly. When you engage with the noise, you surrender your cognitive resources to someone else's agenda.
That's a scary thought.
It is. To determine what actually matters, you must evaluate the half-life of the information.
The half-life.
Yeah. Noise decays rapidly. The trending topic that consumes the internet today will be completely irrelevant in 72 hours.
True.
The urgent fire drill email chain at work is often completely forgotten by the end of the quarter. Signal, on the other hand, compounds.
Signal compounding is a really profound concept. The things that actually dictate the trajectory of a life or a business deep technical skill acquisition, the cultivation of high-trust relationships, structural health, compound interest, these things do not scream for your attention.
No, they're quiet.
They do not trigger immediate emotional spikes. They require slow, deliberate, sustained focus.
Which is why the seventh and final point in the source material is the keystone of the entire framework. Think long-term. Good decisions are based on long-term benefits, not short-term feelings.
If you understand this one sentence, you understand the fundamental mechanism of success.
The entire battle of clear thinking is a temporal conflict. It is a war between your present self and your future self.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, standing at a crossroads? Your short-term feelings are always lobbying for immediate gratification or the immediate avoidance of pain.
Because your emotions only understand the present tense.
Right. The amygdala does not care about your 10-year career plan or your retirement account. It only cares about escaping the discomfort of this exact second.
The logical prefrontal cortex is the only entity capable of advocating for the long-term benefit.
It's wild to think about.
It is the ultimate evolution of the psychological marshmallow test.
Oh yeah, like with the kids.
Exactly. The ability to delay gratification is not just a predictor of success in children. It is the continuous, daily requirement for achievement in adulthood. Every difficult decision requires you to pay a toll of short-term friction to access a long-term reward.
Think about the mechanics of building a company. The short-term feeling dictates that you should micromanage every detail because yielding control causes acute anxiety.
You want to hold on to everything.
Right. But the long-term benefit requires you to delegate, to endure the short-term mistakes of your team, and build scalable infrastructure. If you prioritize the short-term feeling of control, you become the bottleneck and the company just stagnates.
Or examine a difficult interpersonal dynamic. Let's say you need to deliver severe but necessary critical feedback to a valued partner.
Always fun.
The short-term feeling is dread. The impulse is to soften the blow, use ambiguous language, or just avoid the conversation entirely to maintain momentary harmony.
We've all been there.
But the long-term benefit of rigorous honesty is mutual respect, course correction, and a deeper foundation of trust. Clear thinking demands that you endure the agonizing awkwardness of the present moment to secure the future relationship.
Because the default impulse will always seek the path of least resistance. It will always offer you a rationalization for why the short-term comfort is actually the smart play.
Oh, the rationalizations are endless.
Like, I'm too tired to work out today, I'll push twice as hard tomorrow, or I won't rock the boat in this meeting, I'll bring it up later.
Right.
Clear thinking is the ruthless rejection of those rationalizations. It is the uncompromising stance that the permanent trajectory of your life is more important than your temporary emotional state.
And that leads directly to the ultimate conclusion presented by Parrish. The text states that better thinking leads to better decisions and a more successful life.
And it is crucial to understand that this is not just abstract philosophy.
No, it's the physics of cause and effect. Your current reality is the lagging indicator of your historical decision-making system.
Wow. If your system is governed by default thinking, if you instantly react to stressors, if you allow fatigue to dictate your actions, if you bury your mistakes to protect your ego, and if you constantly prioritize the relief of short-term feelings over the compounding reality of long-term goals, the math guarantees a specific trajectory.
It does.
The result is compounding chaos, professional stagnation, and deep personal regret. The input determines the output.
But if you systematically upgrade the architecture, if you recognize the physiological reality of the amygdala hijack and enforce the pause, if you construct resilient systems that constrain your darkest impulses, if you approach your own failures as a scientist gathering telemetry data, and if you develop the discipline to ignore the decaying noise of the present to focus exclusively on compounding signals, success ceases to be a matter of luck.
It becomes an engineering inevitability. You align your actions with the fundamental mechanics of reality. We have covered a massive expanse of cognitive territory today. We started by dismantling the myth of the rational mind, acknowledging that we are biological creatures carrying ancient hardware that defaults to emotional impulsivity under pressure.
And we explored the mechanics of overriding that hardware, buying time for logic to boot up.
We built structural fail-safes to protect us when willpower inevitably collapses, and we transformed the shame of failure into the cold, valuable data of calibration.
And finally, we established the ultimate metric for clear thinking: the willingness to subordinate the immediate demands of our emotions to the long-term requirements of our goals.
For you listening to this, the integration of these concepts does not require a total overnight overhaul of your personality. It begins with micro adjustments.
Just small steps.
The next time you feel the temperature rise in a conversation, the next time you feel the sudden, desperate urge to make an impulsive choice to alleviate anxiety, recognize it for what it is.
It is just biology.
It is a default setting firing off. You don't have to obey it. You can simply pause, let the wave crash over the breakwater, and wait for clarity. The distance between reaction and response is where your entire future is built.
This raises an important question, though, and it is a reality we must leave you to wrestle with.
Okay, what is it?
We have established quite clearly that the architecture of success requires prioritizing long-term benefits over short-term feelings. But what happens when the mathematically correct, logical, long-term choice dictates that you must inflict immediate, acute pain, not just upon yourself, but upon someone else?
Oof, that's heavy.
Firing a loyal but persistently incompetent employee who relies on you. Terminating a relationship that is deeply comfortable but structurally misaligned with your future. The frameworks we discussed provide the clarity to know exactly what must be done.
But perhaps the most agonizing limitation of clear thinking is that it only provides the map. It does not provide the fuel.
Exactly. The logic may be flawless. The systems may be perfect. But executing the choice still requires the brutal courage to look someone in the eye and cause them pain, while your own empathy screams at you to take the easy way out. The X-ray reveals the break, the mechanics dictate the cure, but setting the bone still breaks the skin.
A sobering reality to cap off the framework. Knowing what to do is only half the battle. Finding the fortitude to pull the lever is the other. We leave you with that to consider as you audit your own decisions this week. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep refining the system. Keep demanding clarity, and we will see you next time.